Welcome back to The Deep Dive. Today we're tackling a figure who maybe looms larger as a monument than as a man in our minds. George Washington.
Yeah, the marble statue image.
Exactly. So we're going to peel back those layers. We've got a stack of sources here, and the goal is to find the complicated, ambitious, human person inside the founding father, the first president, the guy who was there right at the start of it all.
Right. And our mission really is to trace that whole evolution. We need to start with that young, very hungry Virginia planter and military officer,
Yeah.
the one who made some, frankly, huge mistakes early on that shaped everything.
Mm-hmm.
And then follow him through the revolution, that grueling war where, honestly, he built his reputation on pure persistence, right up to becoming that nonpartisan leader who basically invented the presidency as we know it, setting all these precedents.
And we can't avoid the tough stuff either.
No, absolutely not. We have to confront the central paradox of his life, especially his relationship with slavery, how it shifted or didn't shift enough.
Okay, so where do we start? Not his birth. You suggested something more dramatic.
Let's jump right into the moment that put him on the map, globally speaking.
Yeah.
Not exactly in a good way at first. It's 1754, the Jumonville affair, a moment of youthful aggression meeting diplomatic disaster.
Right, this sounds like a crucial starting point. Explain what happened.
Okay, so picture this. Washington is, 22? A young colonel leading Virginia militia into the Ohio country disputed territory big time. He gets some intelligence, maybe faulty, maybe not, and decides to ambush a small French detachment.
Ambush, okay.
And in the process, the French commander, Joseph Coulon de Jumonville, is killed.
And the French reaction? Predictably furious, I imagine?
Oh, immediate and furious. They find Jumonville dead, and they point the finger straight at Washington. They see it as a totally unprovoked attack, maybe even on a diplomatic mission, which is how they framed it.
So this leads directly to the Battle of Fort Necessity.
Exactly. Washington's small force is then attacked by a much larger French force. He's trapped, has to surrender. And here's the kicker. He signs a surrender document.
Okay.
But the document, written in French, includes language that has him taking responsibility for the assassinat of Jumonville.
Assassination, that's a loaded term.
Hugely loaded. Now, Washington later claimed, poor translation, rain blurring the ink, the whole 9 yards. And historians debate this. In 18th century military French, assassinate could mean a more general killing or unauthorized killing, not necessarily premeditated murder like we think of it today.
But the damage was done.
The damage was absolutely done. His signature was on a document admitting he assassinated a French officer. This single incident, really sparked by this young guy's ambition and maybe recklessness, is pretty much universally seen as the spark that ignited the French and Indian War.
Which then blew up into the 7 Years' War globally. Wow.
Yeah, a massive geopolitical blunder right out of the gate, all driven by this young officer's ambition.
Okay, so you mentioned ambition. To understand that, maybe we do need to rewind just a bit to his early life. Why was he so driven?
Right, let's set that early scene. George Washington, born February 22, 1732, Pope's Creek, Virginia.
And there's that calendar thing, right? Old style versus new style.
Exactly. Quick history nerd note. Britain switched calendars in 1752, so sometimes you see Feb 11, 1731. But 1732 is the date we use now. Point is, he's born into the Virginia gentry, but maybe not the absolute top tier initially.
His family situation sounds complicated. First of 6 kids for Augustine and Marybelle Washington, and that relationship with his mother.
Sources suggest it was difficult, maybe a bit strained, overbearing even. And that might have pushed him, to seek approval and mentorship elsewhere.
Which leads him to his half-brother, Lawrence.
Absolutely. Lawrence was older, more established, had the connections, inherited the property that would become Mount Vernon. He actually renamed it Mount Vernon. Lawrence was the role model. Sophisticated military experience, everything young George aspired to be.
And George eventually gets Mount Vernon.
Yeah, but it's a process. He leases it after Lawrence dies young from tuberculosis in 1752, and then inherits it fully in 1761 when Lawrence's widow passes. Mount Vernon becomes absolutely central to his identity, his ambition.
Now, education-wise, he didn't get the fancy English schooling his older brothers did.
No, he didn't, which was probably a source of insecurity, but also shaped him. He had to rely on local tutors, self-study. And this pushed him towards practical skills, mathematics, and crucially, land surveying.
Ah, the surveyor. That seems really important.
He was transformative. He gets licensed by 1749, becomes known as a really talented mapmaker, draftsman. These weren't just academic exercises. Survey meant precision, hard work, knowing the land intimately. Think about how valuable that becomes later for a military commander.
Definitely. And then there's that fascinating detail about the rules of civility. As a teenager, he copies out over 100 rules for social conduct.
Yeah, from a French guidebook. It tells you everything about his drive. It shows um, this intense determination to climb the social ladder. These rules covered everything: posture, table manners, how to talk to superiors, stuff an elite education might provide, but he had to learn meticulously, consciously. It's pure self-discipline, building the foundation for that image of control and public standing he cultivated his whole life.
That drive also took him on his only trip abroad, right, to Barbados with Lawrence.
Yes, in 1751. They went hoping the climate would help Lawrence's tuberculosis. Sadly, it didn't.
But something significant happened to George there.
He contracted smallpox. It was apparently a really nasty bout, nearly killed him. He survived, but it left his face slightly scarred.
And the significance beyond the personal ordeal.
Immunity. Surviving smallpox gave him lifelong immunity. Fast forward 20-odd years, smallpox is ripping through the Continental Army during the Revolution. It's a horrific problem. Washington, being immune, could manage the crisis, could implement inoculation policies without personal fear. It was a huge, unforeseen advantage.
Wow. Okay, circling back to the military ambition. Inspired by Lawrence, he gets into the Virginia militia, becomes a major, and then comes that 1753 mission to the Ohio country.
Right, before the Jumonville mess. Lieutenant Governor Dinwiddie sends him as a special envoy, basically tells him, go tell the French to get off our land.
A diplomatic mission, essentially.
Supposedly.
Mm-hmm.
He undertakes this incredibly tough journey, late fall, early winter, has to deal with Native American leaders like the Iroquois chief Tennecarrison.
And that's where he gets that name, Canotocarius.
Yes, devourer of villages. It sounds ominous, but it was apparently an honorific name given previously to his great-grandfather, linking him to that legacy. Still, it hints at the kind of frontier reputation he's already building.
Did the mission work? Did the French leave?
No, they politely told him to shove off. But Washington's detailed report of the journey, the French positions, the landscape that got published back in Virginia and even London, it gave him the public recognition he was craving.
Okay, recognition. Then notoriety with Jumonville and Fort Necessity in 54. He resigns his commission after that, partly out of frustration.
Huge frustration. The big issue was rank. Colonial officers like him could never outrank even a junior officer holding a royal commission from the king. It was a constant source of bitterness. He wanted that legitimacy.
But he doesn't stay out for long. The Braddock expedition in 1755.
No, he volunteers. Even without a commission, he joins General Edward Braddock's massive expedition as an aide-de-camp. Their goal? Kick the French out of Fort Duquesne, the key stronghold in Ohio.
And this ends badly.
Catastrophically. The Battle of the Monongahela is an absolute disaster for the British. They march into a perfectly executed ambush by French and Native American forces. Braddock is killed. The British regulars are routed. Total chaos.
But somehow this disaster turns into a moment of personal heroism for Washington.
It really does. The sources are vivid. He has 2 horses shut out from under him. His coat, his hat are riddled with bullet holes. But he stays cool under fire, helps organize the retreat, basically prevents a total annihilation of the survivors.
So his reputation is salvaged, even enhanced.
Completely. His courage is undeniable. It silences a lot of the critics from the Fort Necessity debacle. He still desperately wants that royal commission, that ultimate status symbol, but he never gets it.
But the experience must have taught him a lot.
Immense lessons. Leadership under extreme pressure, for one. He sees British tactics up close, both strengths and weaknesses. And maybe most importantly, he witnesses the absolute mess of intercolonial politics. The colonies couldn't cooperate. They competed for resources, for glory. That experience, that frustration, plants the seeds for his later belief in a strong central government being essential for national survival.
He finally resigns again in 1758 after Fort Duquesne is eventually taken, albeit finding it abandoned. Time to go home.
Yeah, time to shift focus. Build wealth, gain status through land and politics back in Virginia.
So Washington shifts gears. He's aiming for the life of a prominent Virginia gentleman. And a key part of that is marriage.
A very strategic marriage. In 1759, he marries Martha Dandridge Custis. She's 27, he's 26.
And Martha wasn't just any widow.
No, she was one of the wealthiest widows in Virginia. This is absolutely crucial. We need to understand the concept of the dower estate.
Explain that for us.
Okay, so under law at the time, a widow was entitled to a life interest, basically control and use, during her lifetime of 1/3 of her deceased husband's property. This included land and, significantly, enslaved people. Martha brought a huge dower estate into the marriage.
So Washington doesn't technically own all of it, but he controls it.
Exactly. He manages the dower property, controls the labor of the dower slaves, and reaps the profits during Martha's lifetime. This instantly catapulted him into the absolute top tier of Virginia's planter elite. It fundamentally changed his economic power and social standing.
And with that newfound wealth, he starts expanding Mount Vernon significantly.
Oh yeah. He doubles the estate size, gets it up to around 6,500 acres. And the number of enslaved people under his control increases dramatically. By 1775, between the ones he owned outright and the dower slaves he managed, it was over 100 people.
But even with all this land and labor, the sources say he was facing serious financial problems. Seems counterintuitive.
It does, but it shows the precariousness of the planter economy. Washington liked to live well, maintain that status that meant importing expensive goods from Britain. Plus, tobacco prices were in a slump. It was a cash crop, but volatile.
So he's spending big, income is down.
Exactly. By 1764, he's deep in debt to his British merchants, like 1,800 pounds, which was a massive sum. This financial pressure forces him to make a really smart business move.
Which is the famous shift away from tobacco.
Precisely. He realizes tobacco is depleting his soil and keeping him dependent on those British merchants in the fluctuating market. So he pivots. He starts shifting Mount Vernon's main cash crop to wheat.
And how does that connect to other ventures and maybe even his views on slavery?
Well, wheat is less labor-intensive year-round compared to tobacco. Tobacco requires constant back-breaking work, meaning constant supervision and coercion of enslaved labor. Wheat has more seasonal demands. This frees up labor and capital, allowing him to diversify into things like flour milling. He builds a big merchant mill fishing, even distilling later on.
So it's an economic calculation partly driving a potential shift in thinking about labor.
It seems to be part of it. He starts seeing the inefficiency of relying solely on enslaved labor for everything, especially compared to hiring skilled workers for specialized tasks like milling. This economic perspective, combined with the Enlightenment ideas swirling around, starts subtly shifting his private views on the institution itself. It's a slow burn, but the seeds are planted there.
While he's managing the estate, he's also getting more involved politically. He serves in the Virginia House of Burgesses.
Right, from 1758, basically, until the Revolution kicks off in 75. Initially, he wasn't a big talker, more of a background figure, but the rising tensions with Britain, especially the Stamp Act in 65 and then the Townshend Acts, really galvanize him.
He becomes a vocal opponent.
Yes, he becomes a leading voice against taxation without representation. He's pushing hard for boycotts of British goods in Virginia. By 1774, things are at boiling point, and he's right in the thick of it, co-drafting the Fairfax Resolves.
And those resolves were significant.
Very. They laid out the constitutional arguments against Parliament's actions, but they also included something else, a call to end the Atlantic slave trade.
So he's starting to connect the fight for colonial liberty with the issue of slavery, at least the trade part.
It's starting to surface publicly, yes. He's seeing the hypocrisy, even as he himself relies on enslaved labor. Is that core contradiction again?
Okay, so the political groundwork is laid. War breaks out in 1775. Lexington and Concord happen. Washington heads to the Second Continental Congress in Philadelphia.
Right. And John Adams, recognizing the need for a Virginian leader to unify the colonies, nominates Washington to be commander-in-chief of the new Continental Army.
And the vote is unanimous.
Unanimous. It's partly his military experience, limited as it was compared to British generals, but mostly it's political. He's from the largest colony, Virginia. He looks the part, he carries himself with dignity, and crucially, he projects virtue.
How so?
His first act is symbolic, but powerful. He refuses the salary. He says he'll serve without pay, only asking for his expenses to be reimbursed later. It sets this immediate tone of selfless service to the cause, which is exactly what the fledgling nation needed.
So he takes command. First major challenge. Boston, July 1775. What does he find there?
A mess. He finds a collection of local militias surrounding Boston, not really an army. They're undisciplined, poorly equipped, suspicious of central authority, very regional in their loyalties. His first huge task isn't fighting the British, it's administration. It's imposing discipline, drilling these guys, trying to forge them into some kind of cohesive fighting force.
But they do manage to force the British out of Boston.
Yes. By March 1776. The key move is fortifying Dorchester Heights overlooking the city, with cannons captured from Fort Ticonderoga. Makes the British position untenable. They evacuate.
And Washington makes a point about civilian control right away.
He does. He issues strict orders forbidding any looting or reprisals against loyalists remaining in the city. He wants to establish from the outset that this American army respects civilian authority, that it's not just another conquering force. It's about setting precedents.
But the war shifts. The British aren't just going to sail away. New York becomes the focus.
Washington correctly predicts this. He moves the army down to defend New York City. But the odds are just staggering. The British arrive with this massive fleet, an army, maybe 32,000 professional soldiers, including Hessian mercenaries. Washington has about 23,000 men, mostly inexperienced, poorly supplied.
And the summer of 1776 is rough.
Rough is an understatement. It's a disaster. The Battle of Long Island in August is a heavy defeat, maybe 1,500 American casualties. Washington executes a skillful nighttime evacuation to save the army, but they're forced off Long Island, then out of Manhattan. It's just retreat after retreat.
And it gets worse.
It gets much worse. In November, Fort Washington on Manhattan Island falls. Thousands of American soldiers are captured. Washington's army shrinks dramatically down to maybe 5,400 effective troops. Enlistments are about to expire at year's end. Desertion is rampant. Supplies are scarce. Honestly, the revolution looks like it might just fizzle out right there. It's the absolute low point.
This is where desperation breeds boldness, though. Christmas 1776.
The crossing of the Delaware. One of the most iconic and, frankly, incredibly risky moments in American history. Washington decides on a surprise attack against the Hessian garrison stationed at Trenton, New Jersey.
He crosses the icy Delaware River on Christmas night.
In a blizzard, with freezing temperatures, leaky boats. It's incredibly dangerous. But they pull it off. They surprise the Hessians on the morning of December 26th, achieve a stunning victory, capture nearly 1,000 prisoners with very few American losses.
It wasn't just Trenton, though, was it?
No, that's key. He doesn't just sit back. A few days later, early January 1777, he follows it up with another daring maneuver and wins the Battle of Princeton. Outsmarts the British General Cornwallis.
How important were these two quick victories, Trenton and Princeton?
Immense. Psychologically, they were everything. They snatched the revolution back from the brink. Morale soared. Soldiers whose enlistments were up decided to re-enlist. It convinced people, maybe even the French observing from afar, that the Americans could actually fight and win, that this wasn't just a doomed rebellion, it completely changed the strategic picture.
But the struggles weren't over by any means. The following year, 1777, brings the Philadelphia campaign.
Right. General Howe outmaneuvers Washington again at the Battle of Brandywine in September. The British occupy Philadelphia, the American capital. Washington tries a counterattack at Germantown in October, but it fails due to fog and confusion. More setbacks.
And this leads to criticism of Washington's leadership, doesn't it? Especially after General Gates wins that huge victory at Saratoga up north.
Exactly. Gates's victory at Saratoga, which brings the French officially into the war as allies, makes Washington's losses around Philadelphia look even worse by comparison. This fuels what's known as the Conway Cabal.
What exactly was the Conway Cabal? Was it a real plot?
It was less a formal conspiracy and more a faction of discontented officers and some members of Congress. Figures like General Thomas Conway, General Gates himself, maybe Dr. Benjamin Rush. They were critical of Washington's leadership, suggesting Gates might be a better choice for commander-in-chief. There were letters, whispers, political maneuvering.
How did Washington handle that?
Very shrewdly. He mostly stayed above the fray publicly. He didn't engage in petty arguments. He let the plotters kind of expose themselves through their own clumsy efforts. He used his immense prestige and his network of loyal officers to solidify his position. Ultimately, the cabal fizzled out, but it shows the internal political challenges he faced constantly.
And all this is happening as the army heads into that infamous winter encampment, Valley Forge.
Winter of 1777-1778. Valley Forge has this mythic status, and for good reason. But it wasn't a battle against the British. It was a battle against, well, starvation, disease, freezing cold, and the complete failure of the Army's supply system, which Congress was supposed to manage.
The conditions were horrific.
Appalling.
Yeah.
Estimates vary, but probably 2,000 to 3,000 soldiers died there not from fighting, but from phthisis, dysentery, pneumonia, malnutrition, exposure, lack of shoes, blankets, clothing, food. It was a logistical nightmare and a testament to the suffering endured.
How did Washington keep the army together through that?
Through sheer force of will, partly. Relentless lobbying of Congress for supplies, writing constant letters, pleading for action. He organized foraging expeditions, the Grand Forage of 1778, to seize, well, requisition supplies from the local area, carefully documented, mind you. And crucially, he brings in Baron von Steuben.
The Prussian drill master.
The game changer. Steuben arrives at Valley Forge, and despite not speaking much English initially, implements a rigorous, standardized training program. He drills the soldiers relentlessly, teaches them European battlefield maneuvers, instills discipline and professionalism. Valley Forge wasn't where the army died. Paradoxically, it's where the professional Continental Army was forged in fire and ice.
Washington wasn't just fighting battles and dealing with logistics. He was also involved in intelligence, right?
Absolutely. He understood the importance of good intelligence. He establishes America's first real spy network, the Culper Ring, operating primarily in British-occupied New York City. They used codes, invisible ink, secret couriers. It was quite sophisticated for the time, providing crucial information about British plans.
And that intelligence work must have made the ultimate betrayal even harder to take.
The treason of Benedict Arnold in 1780. Arnold was one of Washington's best combat commanders, a genuine war hero early on. But feeling slighted, passed over for promotion, and facing financial ruin, he conspires to surrender the vital American fortress at West Point on the Hudson River to the British.
And Washington discovers the plot.
Just in the nick of time. The British contact, Major John Andre, is captured with incriminating papers. Arnold escapes to the British side. Washington is reportedly devastated not just by the strategic threat, but the personal betrayal by someone he trusted. He had to personally ride to West Point to secure its defenses.
Okay, despite setbacks and betrayals, the war grinds on. French alliance is key now, and the focus shifts south to Virginia.
Yes. Washington makes a brilliant strategic decision, coordinating closely with the French commander, Marshal Rochambeau. They realize that Cornwallis's British army, operating in Virginia, is vulnerable, maybe more so than the main British force in New York.
So they feint towards New York, but secretly march south.
Exactly. A masterful piece of deception and logistical coordination. The combined American and French armies march hundreds of miles down to Virginia to trap Cornwallis at Yorktown.
And the French fleet plays a critical role.
Absolutely essential. The French Navy, under Admiral de Grasse, defeats the British fleet at the Battle of the Chesapeake, cutting off Cornwallis's escape route by sea and preventing British reinforcements or supplies from reaching him.
Cornwallis is trapped.
Completely surrounded on land and sea, the siege of Yorktown begins. After weeks of bombardment, Cornwallis surrenders his entire army on October 19, 1781. While smaller skirmishes continued, Yorktown was effectively the decisive blow. It broke the political will in Britain to continue the war.
The fighting largely ends, but there's one more crucial moment before Washington leaves the stage as commander, the Newburgh Conspiracy in 1783.
Right. The war is basically won. Peace treaty is being negotiated, but the army hasn't been paid. Congress is broke, ineffective under the Articles of Confederation. The officers are angry, feeling betrayed. There's talk, fueled by anonymous letters circulating in the camp at Newburgh, New York, of maybe refusing to disband the army, maybe even marching on Congress, using the military to force payment. A potential coup.
How does Washington handle this potential mutiny?
It's one of his finest moments, a display of pure moral leadership. He calls a meeting of the officers. He gives this incredibly powerful, emotional speech, acknowledging their sacrifices, validating their grievances, but appealing to their patriotism, their honor, urging them not to tarnish the victory they all fought for by turning against the civilian government, however flawed.
And there's that famous moment with his glasses.
Yes. He pauses, pulls out a new pair of spectacles, fumbles with them a bit, and says something like, "Gentlemen, you must pardon me. I have grown gray in your service and now find myself growing blind." It's this moment of vulnerability, of shared sacrifice, that just breaks the tension. The officers are reportedly moved to tears. The conspiracy collapses. He diffused it through sheer moral authority.
And then finally, peace treaty signed, he does the unthinkable for an 18th century victorious general.
He resigns.
Yeah.
December 1783. In Annapolis, he formally resigns his commission as commander-in-chief before the Continental Congress. He voluntarily gives up power.
How significant was that act?
Monumental. Unprecedented, really. In a world of kings and emperors, successful generals usually seized power. They didn't relinquish it. This act cemented the principle of civilian control over the military, the absolute bedrock of the American Republic. It stunned observers everywhere. That retorted quote from King George III, "If he does that, he will be the greatest man in the world, even if apocryphal," captures the sentiment. It defined Washington's character as truly exceptional.
So, after 8.5 long years away, Washington finally gets his wish. He returns to Mount Vernon, eager for private life. He called it the solitary walk.
Yeah, he was absolutely desperate to get back to his farms, to escape the public stage. He'd spent, maybe 10 days total at Mount Vernon during the entire war?
But the dream of a quiet retirement didn't quite match the reality, especially financially.
Not at all. Mount Vernon, despite its scale, was in rough shape. His absence, wartime disruption, depleted soil, plus he was owed money in depreciated currency. The sources show it was running at a loss. In 1787, it was the 11th year in a row it was in deficit. He was actually land-rich but cash-poor.
So he throws himself back into farming, trying to innovate.
Completely.
Yeah.
He's experimenting with crop rotation, fertilizers, landscaping, and then there's that slightly eccentric but very Washingtonian project, breeding mules.
Mules. Where'd that come from?
He got a prize jackass, a breeding male donkey, as a gift from King Charles III of Spain in 1785. Washington became convinced that mules, the offspring of a male donkey and a female horse, were superior work animals for southern agriculture. Hardier, longer-lived, better suited to the climate than horses.
He really thought they revolutionized agriculture.
He genuinely seemed to believe it. He poured a lot of energy into this mule breeding program. It shows that practical, always improving farmer side of him, even if Mount Vernon never became the cash cow he hoped for.
But the nation's problems wouldn't let him stay retired for long. The Articles of Confederation were proving inadequate.
Dangerously inadequate. Washington had warned they were just a rope of sand. There was no strong central authority to tax, regulate commerce, or defend the nation effectively.
And Shays' rebellion in Massachusetts in 1786 really drove that point home.
That was the tipping point for Washington and many others. An armed uprising of indebted farmers, challenging the state government, and the national government under the Articles was powerless to intervene effectively. It terrified people like Washington who feared anarchy and the collapse of the Union. It convinced him something drastic had to be done. A new constitution was needed.
So reluctantly, he agrees to go to the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia in 1787.
Very reluctantly. He genuinely wanted to stay home. But he knew his presence was essential. His prestige was unmatched. Him being there gave the whole endeavor legitimacy. He was unanimously elected to preside over the convention.
Did he participate much in the debates?
Not extensively from the chair. His role was mostly to maintain order. But behind the scenes, he was influential. He strongly supported the Virginia Plan, which proposed a much stronger national government with separate legislative, executive, and judicial branches. He lent his weight to the faction pushing for a truly national government, not just a tweaked confederation.
He worried it might fail, though.
Oh, definitely. The sources show he despaired at times over the disagreements, the compromises. But once the Constitution was drafted, he became one of its strongest advocates, lobbying hard, especially in Virginia, for ratification. He knew the Union depended on it.
And with the Constitution ratified, a new government formed, there was really only one choice for the first president.
Absolutely inevitable. Washington was unanimously elected by the Electoral College in 1788 and again in 1792. He remains the only U.S. president ever to achieve that.
Taking office in New York City, April 1789, he's aware he's setting the mold.
Acutely aware. He wrote about how the first of everything in our situation will serve to establish a precedent. Every action, every decision he knew would shape the future of the office and the nation.
Like the debate over his title.
Exactly. Some in the Senate, like Vice President John Adams, favored grand, almost royal titles, His Highness, His Majesty the President. Washington pushed back. He insisted on the simple Republican title, Mr. President. It seems small now, but it was a crucial signal about the nature of the new government. Not a monarchy.
He also establishes the cabinet, right? Even though it's not explicitly in the Constitution.
He does. He sees the need for advisors, heads of the major executive departments, to consult with regularly. So he creates the cabinet as this advisory body.
And here's where the irony comes in. The man who hated political factions appoints the two biggest rivals imaginable to his cabinet.
The ultimate irony. Alexander Hamilton, the brilliant, ambitious advocate for strong federal power, national finance, becomes Secretary of the Treasury. Thomas Jefferson, the champion of agrarianism, states' rights, limited government, becomes Secretary of State.
Sparks were guaranteed to fly.
Oh, they flew constantly. Their fundamentally different visions for America clashed right there, inside Washington's own administration. Washington tried to stay above it, remain nonpartisan, though his instincts often leaned more towards Hamilton's federalist view of a strong central government.
So this internal battle really gives birth to the first American political parties, the Federalists and the Jeffersonian Republicans.
Pretty much. That cabinet rivalry is the crucible where the first-party system is forged, much to Washington's own dismay later on.
His presidency wasn't just about setting up structures. He faced major crises, too, like the Whiskey Rebellion.
Right. Starting around 1791, this is a direct challenge to federal authority. Farmers in western Pennsylvania violently resisted the federal excise tax on distilled spirits. Whiskey was basically currency for them. They tarred and feathered tax collectors, defied federal marshals.
How did Washington respond? This was a test of the new Constitution's power.
He saw it exactly that way. After attempts at negotiation failed, he decided on a show of force. He invoked the Militia Acts, called up nearly 13,000 militia troops from several states, an army bigger than the one he commanded at Yorktown.
And he personally leads them.
He actually rode out with the army part of the way, the only sitting president ever to command troops in the field like that. The sheer size of the federal response was enough. The rebellion collapsed with almost no bloodshed. It was a powerful demonstration that the new federal government could and would enforce its laws.
Then there were huge foreign policy challenges, mostly stemming from the French Revolution and the wars engulfing Europe.
Absolutely. Britain and revolutionary France were at war, and the Franco-American alliance from the Revolution was still technically in effect. Many Americans, especially Jeffersonians, sympathized with France. Federalists leaned towards Britain for trade and stability. Washington was determined to keep the young, fragile U.S. out of it.
So he issues the Proclamation of Neutrality in 1793.
Yes, declaring the U.S. would be friendly and impartial toward both sides. This was hugely controversial, especially with those who felt we owed France for their help in our revolution.
And it led to that bizarre incident with the French minister, Genet.
Edmond Charles Genet,
Yeah.
Citizen Genet. He arrives and basically acts like the U.S. is already France's ally. He starts commissioning American privateers to attack British ships, tries to raise troops here to fight Spain, then allied with Britain. He completely ignores Washington's neutrality policy, openly appeals to the American people over the president's head.
Washington couldn't tolerate that.
Not for a second. It was a direct challenge to American sovereignty and presidential authority. Washington demanded his recall from the French government. It was a firm assertion that the U.S. would determine its own foreign policy.
He also had to navigate tricky treaty negotiations. The Jay Treaty with Britain sounds like a political nightmare.
It was probably the most unpopular, divisive act of his presidency. Negotiated by Chief Justice John Jay in 1794, the treaty aimed to resolve outstanding issues with Britain, get them out of frontier forts, settle some trade disputes, avoid another war we couldn't afford.
But people hated it.
Fiercely. Critics, mostly Jeffersonians, saw it as a betrayal of France, too favorable to British trade interests, and not getting enough concessions, especially on the issue of Britain seizing American ships and impressing sailors. There were riots, Jay was burned in effigy.
But Washington backed it.
He did, strongly. He believed avoiding war with Britain was the absolute priority for the survival of the nation. He threw his immense prestige behind it, lobbied Congress hard, and eventually secured ratification by a razor-thin margin in the Senate. It probably prevented war, but it deepened the partisan divide immensely.
Contrast that with the Pinckney Treaty with Spain.
That was a clear success. Negotiated by Thomas Pinckney in 1795, also called the Treaty of San Lorenzo. It resolved border disputes with Spanish Florida and, crucially, guaranteed American navigation rights on the Mississippi River through the Spanish port of New Orleans. That was vital for Western settlement and commerce, a big diplomatic win.
And domestically, he's also dealing with conflict on the western frontier.
The Northwest Indian War, a coalition of Native American tribes, often encouraged and supplied by the British, still lingering in those forts, were resisting American expansion into the Ohio Valley. After some early defeats for U.S. forces, Washington appointed General Mad Anthony Wayne, who decisively defeated the coalition at the Battle of Fallen Timbers in 1794. This, along with the Jay Treaty getting the British out of the forts, effectively opened up much of the Northwest Territory to settlement.
So managing all these interconnected crises, rebellion, neutrality, diplomacy, frontier war, really solidified the power and role of the presidency.
Absolutely. He established the executive branch as a co-equal, powerful force in the new government through navigating these intense challenges.
By the end of his second term, he's had enough. The political attacks had gotten really personal and nasty.
He was exhausted, disillusioned with the growing partisanship he despised, and genuinely longed for retirement, so he makes the decision not to seek a third term.
Setting another huge precedent, the two-term tradition.
Yes, even though it wasn't constitutionally required until the 22nd Amendment much later. His voluntary stepping down reinforced the idea of Republican limits on power. And it led to his final major statement, the Farewell Address, in 1796.
Which he didn't actually deliver as a speech, right? It was published.
Correct. Published in newspapers. He wrote it with significant help from Hamilton, refining ideas they discussed earlier. It's considered one of the foundational documents of American political thought.
What are the key warnings in it?
Three main things stand out. First, a passionate plea for national unity. He urges Americans to value their common identity as American above regional loyalties. He warns that geographical divisions, north versus south, east versus west, could tear the country apart.
Second, the famous warning against political parties?
Yes, a really scathing critique of the spirit of party. He saw factionalism as a dangerous threat, leading to distraction, corruption, foreign influence, and ultimately despotism. It's deeply ironic given the parties were forming right under his nose in his own cabinet.
And third, foreign policy, the entangling alliances line.
Right. He advises the nation to pursue commerce and friendship with all nations, but to avoid permanent political alliances that could drag the U.S. into European conflicts and compromise its independence. Steer clear of Europe's quarrels. He also makes a strong case that religion and morality are indispensable supports for political prosperity in a republic. It was his parting wisdom, his blueprint for national survival.
So March 1797, Washington finally heads back to Mount Vernon for good. Or so he thought.
Well, he gets about 2.5 years of retirement, but even then, he's still involved, still watching national affairs closely.
And his politics became more openly partisan in retirement.
They did. The gloves kind of came off. He became a more committed Federalist, openly supporting President Adams, and even the controversial Alien and Sedition Acts, which were aimed at silencing Jeffersonian Republican dissent. He saw the opposition as dangerous to national stability.
And the farm is still struggling financially.
Still only minimally profitable, which leads to another interesting venture. He builds a massive whiskey distillery.
Wait, the guy who crushed the Whiskey Rebellion starts making whiskey.
The irony is rich, isn't it? But it was purely a business decision. Grain was bulky and expensive to ship. Converting it to whiskey made it more valuable and portable, and it was actually hugely successful. By 1799, it was one of the largest distilleries in the entire country. Shows that entrepreneurial drive never left him.
His retirement is interrupted again by a potential war.
Yes, the quasi-war with France. Relations deteriorated badly under Adams. Fearing a French invasion, Adams asks Washington to come out of retirement one last time, nominating him in July 1798 as Lieutenant General and Commander-in-Chief of a provisional army being raised.
Does he actually command troops again?
He accepts the commission, but makes it clear he'll only take active field command if an invasion actually happens. He delegates most of the organizational work to his Inspector General, Alexander Hamilton. Thankfully, war was averted through diplomacy, and Washington never had to lead troops again. He served in that role until his death.
Okay, we absolutely have to circle back properly to the issue that looms over his entire life. Slavery.
The inescapable paradox. We know he owned or managed, throughout his lifetime, hundreds of enslaved people. The number often cited is at least 577 individuals passing through Mount Vernon under his control at various points.
And his early views were typical for his time and place.
Pretty much. Virginia planter class, standard operating procedure. He inherited enslaved people, he bought them, he managed Martha's dower slaves. He saw their labor primarily as an economic necessity for running his plantations.
But you mentioned earlier things started to shift. When and why?
The shift seems to start subtly in the 1760s. Partly driven by that economic diversification away from tobacco, he starts questioning the efficiency of slavery. Then the revolution fundamentally changes things.
The ideals of liberty and equality.
Exactly. The glaring contradiction between fighting for American liberty while holding people in bondage became increasingly hard for him and others to ignore. He starts expressing private reservations. As early as 1778, he writes privately about wishing to get quit of Negroes, but feels trapped by the existing laws and economic dependence.
But publicly, especially as president, he remains silent.
Largely silent on abolition itself. He clearly understood that slavery was deeply divisive. Any major federal action against it, he feared, would shatter the fragile union he'd worked so hard to create and preserve. National unity trumped abolition in his public actions, or lack thereof. It's a choice historians still debate fiercely.
But his final act on this issue, in his will, was significant.
Extremely significant, especially for a Virginia planter of his status. It stands out. First, he orders his longtime valet, Billy Lee, freed immediately upon his death.
Okay.
But the main provision is for the 123 or 124 enslaved people he owned personally, not the dower slaves who belonged to the Custis estate. He stipulated they were to be freed, but only after Martha's death.
Why the delay?
Likely complex reasons. Concern for Martha's financial security, perhaps. Also, many of his slaves had intermarried with the dower slaves. Freeing his Edians immediately would have split families, creating immense hardship. Delaying it kept those families together, at least on the estate, during Martha's lifetime.
And he provided for them after freedom.
Yes, this is also unusual and important. His will provided funds for the support and education of the younger freed people, and pensions for the elderly and infirm. He took responsibility for their transition to freedom.
And Martha actually freed them early.
She did. Legally, they were to be freed on her death. But imagine this situation. These 120-odd people knew they were destined for freedom, while the dower slaves were not. It created an untenable, potentially dangerous dynamic. So Martha signed the manumission papers effective January 1st, 1801, just over a year after George's death. It was a profound statement, even if tragically late in his life.
Okay, shifting to his more personal beliefs. Religion. He was Anglican, but how devout?
He was a lifelong member of the Anglican Church, later the Episcopal Church, served as a vestryman, attended services regularly, but his personal religious language, especially in public, was very much filtered through the Enlightenment. He often referred to God using deistic terms like providence, the great architect, or the divine author. He encouraged public morality and prayer, but avoided intense theological debates or evangelical fervor. He was a strong advocate for religious tolerance and firmly opposed any kind of established state church. Freedom of conscience was paramount.
He was also a prominent Freemason.
Yes, initiated in 1752 in Fredericksburg. Rose quickly to Master Mason, later served as the charter master of the Alexandria Lodge when it was established. Freemasonry's emphasis on reason, morality, and civic virtue clearly resonated with him.
Let's talk about the physical man, the image. Tall, imposing.
Very. Sources suggest anywhere from 6 feet to 6 feet 3.5 inches, significantly taller than the average man of his time. Definitely had a commanding presence.
And the hair, not a wig.
Definitely not a wig. That's a common misconception. He had reddish brown hair, which he powdered white and tied back in a queue, as was the fashion for gentlemen. The powdering made it look white, hence the wig confusion.
Okay, we have to address the teeth. Please tell us they weren't wood.
Thank you. No, definitely, absolutely not wooden. That myth needs to die. But the reality is almost worse.
How so?
He suffered terribly from dental problems his whole adult life. Lost his first tooth in his 20s, and by the time he became president, he only had one single natural tooth left. He had multiple sets of dentures made over the years.
Made of what, then?
They were crafted from a combination of materials: carved hippopotamus ivory, bone, brass screws, lead, and tragically human and possibly animal teeth. There's evidence suggesting some teeth might have been purchased from enslaved people at Mount Vernon.
That's grim. And they must have been painful.
Excruciatingly painful, by all accounts. They fit poorly, caused swelling, inflammation. They distorted the shape of his mouth, which might contribute to that stern look in some portraits. He was often in constant pain, frequently using laudanum and opiate tincture to manage it. It's a stark reminder of the physical suffering behind the stoic image.
His death came suddenly, though. December 1799.
Very suddenly. On December 12th, he spends hours riding around his farms, inspecting things in freezing rain, sleet, and snow. Comes back chilled. The next morning, he wakes up with a severely inflamed throat, difficulty breathing. It progressed rapidly.
And the medical treatment? Well, it was 18th century medicine.
Exactly. His doctors were called. They diagnosed it as likely quinsy or some kind of throat inflammation. Their primary treatment, bloodletting. Aggressive bloodletting.
How much blood did they take?
Estimates suggest they removed possibly up to 5 pints. That's nearly half the body's total blood volume over several hours. They also administered things like purgatives, emetics, throat blisters. Standard, but in this case, deadly practice.
Was there any alternative suggested?
One doctor apparently suggested a tracheotomy, creating an opening in the windpipe to bypass the obstruction. But the other doctors were unfamiliar or uncomfortable with the procedure, so it wasn't attempted.
So the modern conclusion is?
Most likely acute epiglottitis, a severe swelling of the epiglottis at the back of the throat, blocking the airway. This was then made fatal by the aggressive treatments, particularly the massive blood loss leading to hypovolemic shock. Essentially, the cure killed him faster than the disease might have. It's often cited as a case of medical malpractice, judged by later standards.
His final moments.
He remained composed, aware he was dying, took care of last-minute affairs. His famous last words were simply, "'Tis well." He also gave specific instructions to his secretary, Tobias Lear, to wait 3 days before his body was entombed, likely due to a common fear at the time of being buried alive.
He died on December 14th, 1799, buried at Mount Vernon.
Yes. There was later a plan and a crypt built in the U.S. Capitol to move his remains there. But the family, and particularly Southern politicians, objected. There was that fear voiced during congressional debate that if the Union ever divided, his body might end up on a shore foreign to his native soil. So he remains at Mount Vernon. Hashtag tag tag outro.
So when you look at the whole picture, Washington's place as father of his country seems pretty secure. First in war, first in peace. Leader of the first successful anti-colonial revolution, he consistently ranks among the greatest presidents.
No doubt. His legacy is immense. His character, that integrity, the self-discipline, the sheer resolve is rightly lauded. He held the army together. He held the nation together in its infancy.
But as we've discussed, modern perspectives demand we grapple with the complexities, the contradictions. He's often treated as almost godlike, but historians now rightly focus on things like his lifelong pursuit of Native American lands, sometimes described as an obsession, and the devastating impact of campaigns like the Sullivan Expedition against the Iroquois.
And crucially, that slow, private, incomplete evolution on slavery. His personal manumission in his will was significant, yes, but it came after a lifetime benefiting from enslaved labor and a public silence that allowed the institution to become more entrenched nationally. We have to hold both the achievements and the deep flaws in view.
We saw him thrust onto the stage by, maybe, youthful mistakes and ambition. We saw the leader who endured incredible hardship and loss to keep the revolution alive, and the president who consciously tried to build institutions and precedents for a virtuous republic.
Yet we also saw that intense cabinet rivalry between Hamilton and Jefferson, a rivalry he presided over, maybe even enabled. And that rivalry became the very engine of the partisan politics he so strongly warned against in the farewell address.
Right. Washington himself said, "The first of everything in our situation will serve to establish a precedent." So here's the thought to leave you with. Considering his explicit warnings against partisanship in the farewell address, how do we square that with the fierce foundational party battles that erupted right inside his own cabinet? What does that contrast between his stated ideal of nonpartisan unity and the political reality he experienced and managed tell us about the, well, maybe the enduring, even inescapable nature of political division in America?
It's a fundamental tension, isn't it? Something definitely worth thinking about as you reflect on the real George Washington, the man behind the myths and monuments.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. We'll see you next time.